All right, we're good? Awesome. Well, I just want to welcome everybody who is here present. We've already been cracking up and praying and all the fun things that God wants us to do. And I just want to welcome you online. I am not Pastor Adam, but I am filling in this evening. So we're just gonna get going here. If you have your Bibles, we're going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 9. I'm probably going to introduce you to a character tonight that you've never even heard of before. And if you have, I'd really like to know where you've heard of him before. He is probably one of the most minor characters in the whole Bible, but I believe that wholeheartedly he plays such a role in the Bible that we can't fully even understand. And we're going to break down some of it tonight. He plays a role in showing us the heart of King David, and the man after God's own heart. What does that look like? I sat around with a friend questioning one day while in college at the Lion's Den. It used to be like a cafe type place. We sat around asking, what does a man after God's own heart look like? And we were drawn to 2 Samuel chapter 9 by a Christian music artist. And so what I want to do is I want to read this right now, and then we'll go from there. We're gonna read. Honestly, we're gonna read the whole chapter. Don't worry, it's only 13 verses. So don't worry, it's only 13. We're not reading all 50-something verses of another chapter. All right, here we go. One day David asked, "Is anyone in Saul's family still alive? Anyone to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" He summoned a man named Ziba, who had been one of Saul's servants. "Are you Ziba?" the king asked. "Yes, sir, I am," Ziba replied. The king then asked him, "Is anyone still alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show God's kindness to them." Ziba replied, "Yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive. He is crippled in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. "In Lo-debar," Ziba told him, "at the home of Machir, son of Ammiel." So David sent for him and brought him from Machir's home. His name was Mephibosheth. He was Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. When he came to David, he bowed low to the ground in deep respect. And David said, "Greetings, Mephibosheth." Mephibosheth replied, "I am your servant." "Don't be afraid," David said. "I intend to show kindness to you because of my promise to your father Jonathan. I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat here with me at the king's table." Mephibosheth bowed respectfully and exclaimed, "Who is your servant that you should show such kindness to a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Saul's servant Ziba and said, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and servants are to farm the land for him to produce food for your master's household. But Mephibosheth, your master's grandson, will eat here at my table." Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Ziba replied, "Yes, my lord the king. I am your servant, and I will do all that you have commanded." And from that time on, Mephibosheth ate regularly at David's table like one of the king's own sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah. From then on, all the members of Ziba's household were Mephibosheth's servants. And Mephibosheth, who was crippled in both feet, lived in Jerusalem and ate regularly at the king's table. So what's going on here, right? It starts with verse 1. One day David asked. The king had conquered everything. He had done everything he was supposed to do. He'd done everything that God had told him to do and everything that man was supposed to do when they became king. And he was like, "What can I do?" So let's look at verse 15 of chapter 8. And it says, "So David reigned over all Israel and did what was just and right for all his people." So he was done. He was done conquering at this point. And then we see in the first verse of chapter 1, one day David asks, is anyone in Saul's family still alive? Anyone to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Not Saul's sake, Jonathan's sake. If you remember, there is this moment when Saul is chasing David, and he's trying to kill him. And Jonathan and David make a pact, right? Because Jonathan knows. Jonathan knew what everybody else knew, but Saul was denying that David was the next king. And Jonathan also knew that the traditions were that when the king took over, he had to kill off the family. There could be no more heirs. There could be no one left that could take the throne. And for that very reason is the reason Mephibosheth lives. So that covenant that they set up was in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 14 and 15. And it says this, in verse 14, and may you treat me with the faithfulness, this is Jonathan speaking to David, and may you treat me with the faithful love of the Lord as long as I live. But if I die, treat my family with this faithful love, even when the Lord destroys all your enemies from the face of the earth. So see, David knew there was one more. So David had wiped Saul's family, gone. Jonathan's family, gone. But he knew there was the one. He's probably like us. It was in the back of his mind, and he's sitting there pondering, and it recalled, and he asked. So here it is. David seeking out Jonathan's offspring. Kind of sounds like when Jesus went out and found those that needed him. David did what he did to keep his covenant. I want to make that very clear. There was a covenant, there was a promise, and everything else happened that was supposed to happen. And then David kept his covenant. He kept his promise. He was a man of his word. So what does it look like to be a man or a woman after God's own heart? You got to keep your word. You got to keep your covenant. When you say you're going to do something, do it. My kids crack up at school because I carry around a little, it's actually in my office right now, it's a little journal, right? I got 3 of them. I keep one for officiating sports, I keep one for personal, and I keep one for school. And I walk around with it. And I tell them, if you ask me something or tell me something and I don't write it down, you stop me and make me write it down. Because I won't remember. My brain is so messed up at this point, I just won't remember. So I write it down. And when I sit down with my department head or I sit down with my other teachers, they love it. If I don't break out the green notebook, they'll go, where's your notebook? My boss will ask me now. She'll say, where's your notebook? Because they know that's how I keep up. That's how I do things. Sometimes we forget the covenants that we've made with God. Sometimes we forget the covenants we've made with man. So guys, I know we don't like to journal. We don't like to write down in a diary. Sometimes we just need to write things down. See, David kept his covenant, but if we read on a little further in the Bible, we read about Jesus being the new covenant, bringing the new covenant. See, the old covenant versus the new covenant was something they tried to do. They tried to pit the old covenant versus the new covenant. But the reality was the new covenant was fulfilling the old covenant, just like David was fulfilling his covenant by seeking out Mephibosheth. Something really stands out to me about Mephibosheth. What stands out to you? What stands out about Mephibosheth? He was crippled in both feet. In both feet, Mephibosheth is crippled. Now let's talk about Mephibosheth, all right? It's actually a nickname. And its meaning is from the mouth of shame. That's not the name that Jonathan and Mephibosheth's mom gave him. Mephibosheth is actually a nickname. What a nickname, right? We're like, that's JR, or hey, that's Mikey, or They're like, no, that's the hardest name we possibly could pronounce in the future, Mephibosheth, right? Like, that's not, I mean, y'all, I'll be honest with you. I sat in my house for hours practicing how to say this name when I first wrote this lesson. And so it's a nickname meaning from the mouth of shame, possibly referring to his physical condition. You see, no crippled animal could ever be offered to God. And no disabled priest was allowed to stand before God with a people's offering. Likewise, Mephibosheth's condition, his condition, disqualified him from the crown. You see, he couldn't sit on the throne. He was no threat to David. David knew that. That's why he survived. He was no threat. It disqualified him. You see, if you were crippled then, you were worthless to society, right? Sickness could be overcome, right? They saw leprosy overcome. That's why they were shunned, but they weren't worthless. Being sick was shunned, but not worthless. But being disabled, now they were worthless. So why was he crippled? Why was he crippled? Well, we actually know why he's crippled, okay? It's really interesting that we do know. And a few chapters before this, in chapter 4, verse 4, it says, Saul's son Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth, who was crippled as a child. He was 5 years old when the report came from Jezreel that Saul and Jonathan had been killed in battle. When the child's nurse heard the news, she picked him up, fled. But as she hurried away, she dropped him, and he became crippled. The actions of the very king sitting in front of him led to him being crippled. And I promise you, that's a story he heard over and over and over in his life. You're disabled. You are worthless because of King David. You are no good to society because of King David. This fueled hatred and bitterness in Mephibosheth. And I'll be honest with you, as a human being sitting in front of you right now, I don't blame him. I'd be mad too. I couldn't go to David. You see, the circumstances do not dictate who you are. You dictate who you are. Mephibosheth was disabled, but that wasn't who he was. However, for his whole life, he was told that's who he was. In fact, they changed his name to Mephibosheth. Imagine that. Imagine me having my name changed to post-traumatic stress disorder, and that being what I live with forever. I can't go back to being Richard. I can't go back to being Richard Benjamin Robertson. I am from here on out post-traumatic stress disorder, some ending to make it a name. That's me. And you are whatever you are. You are depression. You are sickness. You are cancer. You are messed up knee. You are broke neck. You are old. I didn't say it. I just echoed it. You're carpal tunnel disorder. You're all of that. You're not you. Imagine the hatred and the bitterness that would grow inside of you. How do we know Mephibosheth was downtrodden? Well, it's actually a phrase he uses. He calls himself a dead dog. It's the same Hebrew phrase David used when he first met Saul. Did you know that? When he first meets Saul, the very first time ever, he's so overly humble that he calls himself a dead dog. So imagine being David. Now you're sitting on that very same throne that you stood before, not very long before this. And Mephibosheth saying the same thing. Mephibosheth knew it was the right of the new king to kill any descendants of the former king. and yet he still came. Why did he come? I believe wholeheartedly he came because he wanted to die. Did you see that, Chris? I got some looks. Some of y'all looked up from whatever you were just looking at and was like, what? Yeah. I think Mephibosheth came knowing it was his time to die. It was time. He was the last of Jonathan's descendants, and he knew it was the king's right. But see, David's not buying this self-pity, right? If you read, when Mephibosheth calls himself a dead dog, what does David do? Doesn't even entertain it, does he? He doesn't even respond to it. He basically acts like he doesn't even hear it. And what does he do? He turns to a servant. He ignores such a dumb mistake of a term for himself in Mephibosheth. David turns to a servant. He says in his actions, I'm not listening to that. You're not that. And I'm not going to let you stay in that. In fact, let me talk to this servant over here to remind you of who you are. So what did he do? How did he remind him who he is? Mephibosheth was actually due all the land that belonged to Saul. So that was kind of the tradition. If you're not going to kill off the family, if you're not going to kill off the descendant, then you have to give them what belonged to them. Okay? So that's kind of why you would kill off a descendant, is you didn't want to give them what you had just taken. But not David. David really looked at everything he had and said, I have enough. I have enough. And Mephibosheth, you deserve more. And so not only did he provide him land and servants, but he provided him probably one of the biggest honors he could ever give him, a seat at the table. When I dreamed about this sermon with my friend, we built this idea of a table. In fact, the first time I actually brought a version of this, we spent all night the night before setting up this huge table at the front of the church with representatives of everyone who would have been at the table. And so I had to do some research, right? And I was a college student, and I studied the Christian ministries at Emmanuel. So I like to study the Bible. I like to break down these things because here's what I know. When we read this book and we read about Mephibosheth, okay, our brains treat him like a character. He's just a character in a book. David, just a character in a book. Right? Ziba, just a character in a book. But the reality is they were human beings. They had emotions, they had feelings, just like you and I. And so when they do things, we have to understand why they do things, right? Okay? I was coaching swim today, and I had a kid. He's just struggling. He's just struggling with his freestyle stroke. All right, that's the one where you go over the top. Everybody else does, right? But we have to do it competitively. We have to build a wake. When we build that wake, that's how we breathe. We breathe behind that wake. We have to do all these things. Our hands have to go in a certain way. Our feet have to kick a certain way. And so he just wasn't understanding what I was trying to tell him in the pool. So I videoed him, right? And I made him get out of the pool, and I made him watch that video. Now, if you're just standing there watching me video a kid swimming, you're like, what is that guy doing? Right? If my story's ever written, it's like, oh, he taught that student how to swim. That's all you would ever know. But behind that is, I'm teaching this 6th grader how to swim properly because he has the potential of being a great swimmer on our team as he gets older. So I have reasons, just like people in this Bible have reasons. So I started digging in. What does that mean to sit at the table? Who else is sitting at the table? Well, who sat at the table? Joab. Joab sat at David's table. And Joab was the head of all military officials. Now, I know how important that person is, right? Probably had a bunch of stars and stripes and all kinds of stuff on his shoulder, on his chest, on his hat, his helmet. He was important. All military officials reported to him. He's a pretty important dude. Jehoshaphat, we've heard that name before, right? Different one, though. Don't worry, it's a different one. He was the court historian. So whenever David was like, I wonder what happened in that battle. I don't remember. Jehoshaphat, come tell me about that battle. That was his job. Then there was Zadok and Ahimelech, and they were the priests. They were the head priests. Again, very, very important people. They're the priests to the man after God's own heart. Think about what that comes with, right? You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like I'm the chaplain for the president. You know what I mean? Like that's a huge deal. Doesn't matter who the president is. I'm the chaplain to the president. That's a big deal. Then there was Sariah, a scribe or the court secretary, right? That's a pretty important job. And then there's my favorite, Benaniah. He was the security officer. You wasn't getting to David without going through Benaniah. That's a pretty important job. When I was in the military, I was in the Navy, and I was in police officer school down in San Antonio, Texas. And they said, hey, we're going to go down to Corpus Christi this week, and we're taking your class. And so my class had about 10 people in it, 11 people in it. I think it was 12. Anyways, so it was around that number. There wasn't a lot of us. And they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go down to Corpus Christi. There's a big Blue Angel show. If you know anything about the Blue Angels, they're the bad of the bad, man. Those dudes, they fly these F-14 Tomcat jets just right on top of each other within inches. I mean, they're amazing. They are the best of the best. Like, they make Tom Cruise and Top Gun look like garbage, okay? They're the best. And so they said, we're going to go down to the show. You guys are going to park cars and direct traffic, right? Good police officer work, okay? And I'm like, sure, why not? Sounds like fun. Can I get out of it? They're like, no. I'm like, then we're not volunteering. We're being told. So we're going down there, and we jump on a bus, and we're headed down there, and we pull over for gas, and they call four of us off the bus. And I was like, we've done it now. We've done it. And I look around, and everyone that they called had already been in the Navy for a while. So I'd already been in the Navy for a few years, and everyone else they called had been in the Navy. Now, the people they didn't call were coming straight from boot camp, okay? So they were fresh in the Navy, right? They still had the Navy glasses. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Those big brown okay. So they still had that. They still had their basic training boots. I threw mine out as soon as I left, right? Those things were just cardboard on the bottom. They still had their New Balances. I mean, they were fresh, okay? And so, but us salty ones, as we called ourselves, they called us off the bus, and they said, listen, all those guys are going to park cars. They're going to direct people to the right spot. But here's the deal. We can't let anybody near the pilots, right? Because they're important. Without them, there's no show. All this money we're raising by selling tickets to the show is useless if we lose a pilot. So you guys are in charge of guarding the pilots. All right, we're going to guard some pilots. And then you get there and you realize my skinny 135-pound body ain't nothing compared to those guys. I'm not stopping anybody from getting to those guys. I hope those guys protect me, right? All right? It's kind of like Benaniah. Look, David just killed everybody. I just watched him. Saul, Jonathan, gone. I hope that's who I'm protecting. Okay, sure. I got an easy job. That day, I had an easy job. Those pilots were like, listen, you guys, you just have to be here. Just chill out. All right? Now, when all the other guys in our class saw us, like, dude, you're hanging out with the Blue Angels? You're so cool. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I got you. Do you want an autograph? Yeah, but I don't know which one. Yeah, me either. Not doing autographs. Sorry. You know what I mean? So that was like, I was important for a moment, right? It was just a moment. It was just a brief moment. But it was hot. It was Corpus Christi. So there's no AC in Corpus Christi. So those guys are important. And that's how you would have viewed all of those people sitting at that table. But see, David gave Mephibosheth a seat, not because he would deserved it, because he didn't. He deserved to die. He gave Mephibosheth that seat, not because he loved Mephibosheth. He didn't even know Mephibosheth. See, he gave Mephibosheth that seat because of his love for Jonathan. Sounds a lot like somebody else I know in this book. sounds a lot like Jesus to me. You see, David looked past Mephibosheth's broken feet. He couldn't have hit him, right? He didn't have braces. He didn't have one of those cool electric wheelchairs my dad used to ride in. You know what I'm talking about? Y'all know the ones. Y'all know the ones. They can raise up and rock back, all right? And they're driving. Yeah, if you ever come to Royston, can't miss them. They're running up and down the roads in Royston. And he didn't have one of those. So he would have been brought in and basically dumped in the floor. So there's no hiding his crippledness. There's no hiding his scars. But David didn't even see him. He looked right past him. Not because he was Mephibosheth, but because he was Jonathan's son. You see, Jesus, he looks past all the scars. Thank God he looks past all the social statuses. I mean, personally. I'm grateful for that. You see, all of that death that we read about, that Jesus took, it was rightfully ours. But he provides a way to overcome the very thing separating us from him, and that's sin. He didn't die for you because of who you are. He died for you because you are God's. I think we forget about that in the church. We forget, right? Who are you? Oh, I'm Jesus' follower. Oh, I'm a believer. No. You are ordained by God to be here. And that's why Jesus died for you. Not because of who you are, but because of who you belong to. You see, it was the love for God. Let me make this exception here. We hear all the time, it's the love of God that put Jesus on that cross. No. It's the love for God that put Jesus on that cross. The cross. What does the cross provide? A place at his table. The cross provides a place for you and for me at the table with God, at the table with Jesus. We read about the feast. I don't know about you, but I read about the feast in the end times, and I think, man, what's that going to look like? Who cares? I'm not going to care, and neither are you. Why? Because Jesus is going to be there. You see, it didn't matter to Jesus what's going to happen at that feast. That's why he never tells us, oh, you're going to eat this, and you're going to have this, you're going to do this. Why? Because it only matters to Jesus that we're there. It only mattered to David that Mephibosheth was there. He didn't care he was crippled. I mean, think about that. He's going to have to be carried to dinner. He's going to be carried away from the table. He's going to be set up on the chair. I mean, there's so much that's going to go into putting Mephibosheth at the table. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Jesus just gives it freely, just like David did. He asked nothing of Mephibosheth, except for one thing. Do you remember what he asked him? What's the one thing he asked of Mephibosheth? Come. Come see me. Put your pride to the side. Accept the fate that you assumed you're going to get. Take the very thing that you know is supposed to happen and put it to the side and come. That's all he asked of him. From there, it was all about David giving to Mephibosheth. So, what keeps you from answering that call of just come? Just come. Is it bitterness? Is it self-pity? Is it anger? Is it lack of self-worth? I'll be 100% honest with you guys here. We're going to act like those online don't hear me. The thousands and millions across the world. Those of you who know me or see me around, I present myself pretty confident. My coworkers even laugh that they forget that I'm brand new to teaching, much less to my school, much less to the job that I'm doing within teaching. They forget because I carry myself with some confidence. But the reality is, not very confident. I probably lack confidence more than I give off confidence. And it is a detriment at times. When I need a nice verbal boost from my friends or from those who I work for, they don't normally give it to me because they don't want to feed into the ego that they think I have. But the reality is, I just don't have it. But that's my problem. That's what I deal with. When I was dealing with all the PTSD and the anxiety stuff before I got on the medication properly and allowed my brain to begin the healing process, I was angry and bitter a lot. In fact, if you are friends with me on Facebook, you're friends with me on my second Facebook account because my first one was so full of bitterness and anger, I just deleted it. They asked, would you like to download this so you can save everything? Nope. I don't want this thing to ever exist. I was full of bitterness and anger. My friends would unfriend me on Facebook because they thought I was talking about them, but the reality was I was just talking about myself. I was mad at myself. I was mad at the world. Nobody in particular. I just would be angry. I'd wake up and go, yeah, today's an anger day. I think I'm just going to be mean all day. I mean, literally, that's what I would think. That is being full of anger. That is full of bitterness. I was preaching on Sundays and waking up on Mondays and being full of anger. But I still had a seat at the table. It kept me from that seat a lot. But I still had a seat at that table. You see, Jesus does not care where you have been or where you are. He just cares where you're going from here. John chapter 4, verses 1 and 3 say this. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. Let's not take away from the fact that he says trust in God first. Because the reality was, God is the reason he was doing what he was doing. So we can't forget that the reason we do what we do is because of God. I like this one, right? Those of you who have good memorization skills, I do not. But you have good memorization skills, you know what's coming next. And I really like this part. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. Not if it weren't so, I wouldn't have told you. Not if it weren't so, I would lie to you and let you figure it out down the road. No. You see, if there wasn't a place for you at the table, he would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. Okay, so let's stop right there. Who's there? Whose house is this? It's the Father's house. It's the Father's house he's going back to prepare a place for you. Because there's already a place for you, and he's got to prepare it. Make no mistake here. He's not building on. You know, he didn't get the contractor to come in and build on the additional room, right? He did not. He said there is a place for you, and I'm going to prepare it. The Father only has a room for those who are his, right? You come to my house, there's no room for you. You're not mine, right? There's barely room for the ones I got, okay? All right? So in the Father's house, there's no room for those who aren't his. There's no room for Jesus to prepare for those who aren't his. But the best part is, there's room for everybody. Because everybody is His. It's whether you're willing to accept that Jesus has prepared a place for you. Right? I like to go to Airbnbs. I don't like staying in hotels. I like Airbnbs, the Verbos, or whatever. Right? Because when I get there, it's not those paper sheets. It's like good sheets. It's a nice house to stay in. It's been prepared for me. I like that. And I'm sure you do too, if you really think about it. Let's keep reading. I could just preach a whole sermon just on that. We ain't going there. We're running out of time. Don't worry. I got you online. Don't worry. And he says, all right, so if I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you. So if I'm going to take the time to do all of this, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. Why? Where is Jesus? He's with the Father. He's with the Father. You know the way to the place where I'm going. And I think that last verse is very important. You see, Mephibosheth knew David. He knew of David. Right? His whole life, he'd been told, David's the reason you're crippled. David and his greed and his hunger to be the king. That's the reason. So he knew of David. But when he was thrown in the floor and he's laying face down and his crippled, gnarled feet are wrapped up under him, and he's just waiting on that sword that he was due to come flying down and to kill him. It was in that very moment that the David he knew of suddenly was no longer the David that was. The David that he thought he was going to meet became the David that wasn't existent. You see, he became the David that was the way to the table. Verse 5 of John chapter, verse 3 of John, verse 4 of John chapter 4. I added that last. You see, he says, you know the way to the place where I'm going. What is the way? It's Jesus. He's like, you know the way. And I'm like, do we? And he's like, I'm standing in front of you. And they had no idea. So I'm going to ask you two questions that I really want you to ponder on. And I know this is a little shorter than normal, but I really want you to take some time to ponder these questions. Number one, for a long time, I had this card in my Bible, and I think it has since been thrown away. But on this card, I was posed this question. And I want to pose it to you. And I want you to go home, or wherever you're at, and I want you to write this down. Who's sitting at your table? Who's sitting at your table? See, I think in life we have two tables. This is how it was explained to me, and I really like this. In life, there's two tables. And if you say there's not, stop kidding yourself. There are those people that you go to when you need to seek advice on things that aren't spiritual. Right? I do. I have that table. I know there's people that when I need advice on officiating in sports, what do I need to do next? I go to those people on that table. When something is offered to me at my job, I go to those people at my table. They're at that table. But I've also got this other table. And they're the people that I go to when I'm seeking spiritual things. Now, those tables have a lot of overlap. People sit at both, but there really are two tables. So who sits at your table? Who provides you security? Is it your husband, your wife? Is it your son, your daughter, your grandson, your granddaughter? Is it the kid at church who just always seems to know what to say to you and you just can confide in them? Who is it? I mean, let's be realistic. My person, it's Susan, right? Not because it's supposed to be Susan, but that's my security blanket. When I'm feeling all that lack of self-worth, that's who I go to. I mean, Carrie too, but Susan mainly, right? Carrie hears a lot of things, but she can't respond back, right? And if she does, I'm dying of a heart attack or God's coming back, right? I mean, it's one of the two, because that's some crazy things if my dog starts talking back to me. Or I'm going to see what she's eating. One of the two. Or what I'm eating. Maybe I've gotten some bad bananas or something. But Susan is my security blanket. Right? So who is your security person? Who's your person that you can turn to and go, man, I'm really struggling with this decision, and that person can go, well, yeah, you remember you kind of dealt with this like 5 years ago. Or remember like 2 years ago you said this. Who's your historian? That's my brother. My brother has a memory like Fort Knox. Ain't nothing getting in. And right now at his age, ain't nothing getting out. You know what I mean? Like it's just, but I'll call him and go, hey, who was this so-and-so? Or what happened on this such and such day? And he just spits it right off. And I'm like, I'm so envious of you. But he's my historian. My mom is my historian. Those are people that sit at my table. Pastor Adam and Miss Tina are my historians because they'll say, remember when we were at that conference and you were dreaming about this and we were talking about this? See, those are the people sitting at your table. Who's sitting at your table? Who is sitting at your table that when you just need a prayer, you go to them? I talked about this a couple Sundays ago, right? 2 people in my life right now. If I need a prayer, I go to them, right? One of them we all go to, Miss Doylette, right? If I just need a prayer, I just go to her. Listen, I need to pray about something. Hey, Miss Doylette, do you remember 11 months ago me coming to you and saying, I need prayer because I just got fired? She prayed for that, right? And the other one is another member of our church who just joined the church, Miss Donna Godwin. For over almost 2 decades, I've just gone to her. She's my prayer. She just is. I love to listen to her pray. I do. There are certain, man, I'm going to tell you something, and he's going to be mad because I'm even bringing it up. But I'm going to tell you something. I love to listen to Chris talk to God. When Chris Little starts talking to God, y'all have heard the story about me showing up by myself that Sunday with Carrie and sitting on the 3rd row right over there and sitting behind my friends, the Tanners, and they were the only people I knew. But comes to find out, I did know the Trips, but I didn't realize I knew the Trips. But anyways, and I'm like, what is this church all about? I don't really like doing denominations anymore. I thought I was going to be a non-denominational guy the rest of my life. And here I am in a large denominational church, and I don't know anything about this place. And this dude gets up, and I don't even know what he was wearing. I don't know what he looked like. I'm telling you, I told my wife, that was the first thing I brought up, was him. And she goes, well, who was he? I said, I don't know. She goes, well, what did he look like? I have no idea. But I listened to him talk to God from that stage, and I knew I was in the right place. So who's at your church table? Second thing is this. Are you willing to put aside who you think you are and who you've always been called to answer the call to sit at his table? See, the people who sat at David's table were the people he turned to when he needed advice. The people sitting at Jesus' table who are still living are the people who Jesus needs to go and be the hands and the feet. So are you willing to sit at his table? He's not going to force you to sit at his table. He's prepared a place, but you don't have to sit there. You have to choose to be there. And what does that look like? One of the last things in this chapter that really stands out to me is Mephibosheth, this crippled man, his whole life full of bitter and anger, gets a place at the table. And what does it say in the beginning of verse 12? Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah. It wasn't until he accepted his position that he began to breathe life into the world. So if you feel like you're not breathing life into the world, you need to go to the table. You need to fall at the feet of Jesus, accept your place at the table, go sit at the table. There's no way you sit in the presence of the very giver of life. There's no way you sit and breathe the same air that breathes life into every single human being, including yourself. There's no way you eat of the same food of the very maker of the heavens and the earth, and you don't begin to breathe life. So are you willing to accept it? So you have two tasks. Write down who's sitting at your table, because you're going to forget. You're going to forget. That's why I kept that card in my Bible. And right now, honestly, it's at my desk, because I had a decision to make not too long ago, and I literally pulled that card out. And I reached out to someone at that table. I did. And they said, run the other way. And so I did. And it has panned out to be really good. A very smart decision. So who's sitting at your table? And are you willing to put aside yourself to sit at his table? So I want to pray for you that you are reminded of this as you go home. I want to pray for you that you are reminded of those people sitting at your table. And please understand, you don't have to write all those people down in one sitting, okay? You just don't. You'd be sitting in your car one day, like 3 or 4 days later from now, you'd be like, that person probably sits at my table. Oh, I can't write them down. I've already written them down. I can't write that name down. No, this is an ongoing thing. People are going to come and go from your life. My table had all these eraser marks in it because people just come and go, and that's okay. That's the ebbs and flows of life. So let's pray. Father, I just thank you that you offer us a seat at your table because of what Jesus did for us and not because of what we've done. Lord, I just lift up these people who are joining us online or joining us here live. I just pray right now that you will either whisper into their ear and remind them, or remind them with a loud clanging of cymbals in their life to recognize and acknowledge those who are sitting at their table. Father, I just want to take a moment and just thank you for the people you've put at my table. I didn't invite them to that table. You did. Lord, I just pray right now, if there's someone sitting at these tables that are of these people sitting in front of me or joining us online, if there's someone at that table that doesn't belong there any longer or never really did belong there, Father, I just pray right now that you will remind us those people matter, and we have to be diligent. Thank you, Father, that you are so diligent enough that you were willing to prepare a place for Jesus to die on that cross, to provide the way to you. In your name we pray, amen. Thank you so much for joining us. We're glad you did. Glad you made it this far. I hope you have a wonderful week. And don't forget, we have the 5K this week, right? It's a 5K. So color run. So we hope to see you there. If not, we'll see you Sunday right here in this very room or online. Have a great evening.